The heat in the valley was heavy, the kind of afternoon where even the cicadas sounded exhausted. I was 22, fueled by a frantic, buzzing energy that made me feel like I was constantly running out of time. I found him sitting in the roots of a sprawling banyan tree that looked older than the village itself. His skin was the colour of polished walnut, mapped with 1,000 lines, and his eyes were closed. I sat down nearby, mostly to catch my breath, but my foot kept tapping a nervous rhythm against the dirt. "You're in a hurry to get to the end of the book," he said without opening his eyes. His voice was like dry leaves skittering across a porch. "I just have a lot to do," I replied, a bit defensive. "The world doesn't wait." He finally looked at me, a slow, deliberate movement. He didn't offer a platitude about stopping to smell the roses. Instead, he leaned forward and whispered the words that have lived in the back of my mind for 20 years. "Be careful not to mistake a busy life for a meaningful one. A hummingbird flaps its wings 80 times a second, but it spends its whole life chasing sugar. A mountain does nothing but sit, and it touches the sky." Why it stuck, I wanted to argue. I wanted to tell him that mountains were boring and hummingbirds were vibrant. But as I watched him, perfectly still, perfectly content, I realized I was vibrating with a productivity that produced nothing but fatigue. The lesson: action is not always progress. The shift. I stopped measuring my days by how many items I crossed off a list and started measuring them by how many moments I actually remembered. The old man didn't tell me to stop moving, he told me to stop vibrating. He taught me that if you spend your whole life in a blur of motion, you'll arrive at the end of it and realize you were never actually there. I returned to the valley 15 years later. The frantic 22-year-old was gone, replaced by a man who wore a suit like armor and carried 2 phones that chimed like restless spirits. I told myself I was visiting for perspective, but the truth was simpler. I was vibrating again, and I was exhausted. The banyan tree was still there, its canopy even wider, casting a shadow that felt like a physical weight against the afternoon heat. But the roots were empty. The old man was gone. I sat where he had sat, leaning my head against the bark. I expected a sense of peace, but all I felt was the familiar, jagged hum of my own anxiety. Then I noticed something carved into the wood near the base of the trunk, not by a pocket knife, but smoothed by years of touch. The second lesson. It wasn't a name or a date. It was a simple, shallow indentation where a person's spine would rest. As I aligned my back with it, I saw what he had been looking at all those years ago. He hadn't been staring at the road or the village. He had been looking at a narrow gap in the distant foothills where, for exactly 4 minutes a day, the river caught the light and turned into a ribbon of liquid silver. The realization he wasn't just sitting, he was witnessing. The contrast: my busy life was spent looking at glass screens. His still life was spent looking at the heartbeat of the world. The return to the world. I stayed until the silver ribbon faded to grey. When I finally stood up, my phones were still buzzing in my pocket, but the sound felt distant, like a swarm of insects I could easily walk away from. I realized then that his advice wasn't a command to be lazy, it was an invitation to be intentional. You can be a mountain in the middle of a city, and you can be a hummingbird in the middle of a forest. The location doesn't matter, the rhythm does. As I walked back to my car, I didn't check my notifications. I just listened to the sound of my own boots hitting the gravel, one deliberate step at a time.